Hello, my name is Michael McComas, and I'm the Executive Director of the Accrediting Commission of Career Schools and Colleges. I'm going to take a few minutes today to talk about the ACCSC change of control process. Change of control is defined in ACCSC's Rules of Process and Procedures, Section 2, as the ultimate ability to direct or cause a direction of the actions of a school. So a change in ownership may not always result in a change in control, but if that ultimate ability does change, then an institution must go through ACCSC's change of control process. This includes instances when there is a equal share between two 50% owners that transitions to a 49% and 51% change in ownership. That does result in a change of control, with that 51% owner now having the ultimate ability to cause the direction of the institution. Also, in cases where there is a silent majority owner that doesn't exercise their ability to control, if that majority owner does give up their majority stake to another owner or entity, the fact that they had not exercised control in the past doesn't obviate the need for the institution to go through the change of control process insofar as that change has occurred. Let's talk for just a moment about the overview of the application process. One of the first things that you'll want to do in identifying the type of entity or organization that is undergoing the change. A private corporation, a not-for-profit corporation, a publicly traded corporation, those are all covered by ACCSC's rules and the change of control process. Also, please note that this is a multi-regulatory agency approval process. So depending upon the state or states in which the institution or institutions operate, whether or not the institution participates in federal programs, will all require the institution to go through different processes for different regulatory agencies and also ACCSC's own process as well. So please make sure that you understand what all those requirements are, and to the extent that those can be aligned, that will certainly be most beneficial to the institution going through this process. Now, importantly, ACCSC's change of control process is a prospective approval process. That means that the approval comes pre-transaction. And I want to just take a moment here to emphasize the fact that the institution must receive the approval prior to the transaction. And I'll mention this a little bit later on in this presentation as well, but that is a fundamental component. The institution must receive the approval prior to the transaction for ACCSC. The Part 2 application is post-transaction, and that will be submitted after the transaction has in fact already occurred. And then there will be an onset evaluation that is conducted within 6 months of the date of the transaction. So let's talk about that Part 1 application. Submitted 45 days in advance of the proposed transaction date. It will be reviewed by ACCSC staff to look for the completeness of the application. The application must include audited financial statements for the institution undergoing the change, as well as any proposed new owners of the institution. Failure to submit the audited financial statements will not allow the application to be processed. Must include a description of the transaction and the transaction documents, and again, must receive commission approval. So once the application is deemed to be materially complete by the staff, it will be forwarded to the commission for its review and its approval. And again, the institution should only seek to undergo the transaction after it has received that approval from ACCSC. In the Part 2 process, the application for a change of control Part 2 must be submitted within 45 days of the transaction, and importantly, it must include an audited same-day balance sheet. So that is the balance sheet as of the same day that the transaction occurred. What are the assets? What are the liabilities? The Commission is interested in looking at that same-day balance sheet and comparing that against the pro forma balance sheet that's required as part of the Part 1 application. The Commission will also be looking at the final transaction as it occurred and whether or not the ownership is the same or materially the same as the ownership that was presented in the Part 1 application. Once the Part 2 comes in, the staff will review that, will acknowledge it, and will begin to then schedule the on-site evaluation to the institution that, again, must occur within 6 months from the date of the transaction. The Commission will be looking to review those materials. Will be a visit report that's generated from the on-site evaluation. School will have an opportunity to respond to that. Once those are received and complete, it will be forwarded to the Commission for its review that will give its final approval of the entire change of control process. So again, key elements, key requirements for a change of control. It does require approval prior to the consummation of the change. Importantly, failure to receive that approval will result in the accreditation's withdrawal as of the date of the transaction. So please do not put the institution at risk by undergoing a change of control transaction that has not been approved by ACCSC in advance. There is an exemption in the case of owner death when the approval could not have been submitted and approved, reviewed by ACCSC in advance, and those provisions are also set forth in the rules as well. So what is ACCSC looking for? What's the Commission looking for in that Part 1 application to get that approval complete prior to the transaction? Well, again, sufficiency of financial resources is a key element. That's why those audited financial statements for all the parties is exceptionally important. Will the new proposed owners have sufficient resources to continue to operate the school in a financially sound manner? How is that transaction taking place? Where is the financing? Will there be a significant amount of debt that's left on the balance sheet for the institution? Looking at that same day balance sheet or the pro forma balance sheet, what are going to be the resources after the transaction that will, again, allow it to operate at a sufficiently level of quality. So what is the likelihood that the school will be able to continue to operate in compliance with accreditation standards and have ongoing sufficiency with regard to management and administrative capacity? What are the qualifications of the new owner? What is their experience in operating the school? If the owners do not have specific experience, the proposed new owners don't have specific experience in operating a school, what managers and administrators and leaders within the institution will bring that experience to the institution? And again, Commission is very interested in ensuring that that institution, under the new ownership structure and the new ownership entity, individuals or otherwise, will have the ability to continue to operate in compliance with accreditation standards. So not every change of ownership results in a change of control. So in those instances, there is a modification of ownership report that an institution would need to submit, again, in advance of the modification taking place. You can download that modification of ownership report from the website. But this is for any 10% or greater change in ownership that doesn't result in a change of control. So a minority interest that goes from 25% ownership to 29% ownership, but doesn't in any way change the majority owner, would require the modification of ownership report. The form of ownership changes, but there's no change of control. So a change in a corporate entity or a corporate name, but the ultimate party will retain control of the institution after that transaction or that change in the form of ownership occurs. Would not require a change of control application, but instead a modification of ownership. And then any inter-family transactions, parents to children, amongst siblings, spouses, estate planning, things of that nature, can be handled through, again, the modification of ownership report. But as previously stated, that report needs to come in advance of the change as well. So as a rule, all of these applications and modifications do need to be reviewed and approved by the commission in advance. So I hope that brief overview of ACCSC's change of control process is useful to you. If you have any additional questions or comments or concerns or need further guidance, please reach out to ACCSC staff directly and we'll be happy to try and answer your questions. Thank you.